By the time the morning light skimmed the glass of the riverfront towers, the men who'd come earlier for day labor had already chosen and left. Those left behind drifted toward the warehouse district, drawn by a blinking sign that promised work and a hot meal. The sort of promise everyone knew came with stale bread and loose change. Evan stood among them because standing was all he had left to do. His backpack hung from one shoulder like an apology. He smelled of river wind and the cold concrete where he'd slept. The city's freight whistles had turned his nights into long grey corridors he could not escape. A foreman with a clipboard sorted the line with the practiced boredom of a man who thinks people are just numbers to be stacked. He pointed and barked. You, try again tomorrow." Evan braced himself for the same dismissal he'd gotten so many mornings before. Pride sometimes hurt more than hunger, but when the foreman saw an extra pair of hands, he motioned toward the loading bay. Evan moved in, felt the dust and stale yeast roll off cardboard like a tired tide, and saw a sign above the time clock. No ID, no pay. Once he had an ID and a home and a life with an address. Now those things belonged to someone else. As he bent to lift the first sack of flour, the old injury in his ribs reminded him why he kept his hands low and his eyes down. The foreman, Dale, thin with theatrical impatience, tossed gloves at the group and caught Evan on the shoulder with a sneer. A few men laughed in that brittle, insecure way that tries to hide cruelty. Adrian Lockwood arrived like a different weather. He usually moved through offices smelling of lemon oil and caution, escorted through polished doors and conference rooms. This morning, jet lag had driven him out of his usual routine and into the warehouse where men did the work that kept his name printed on cartons and buildings that tried to touch the sky. Adrian was 57, a man who wore success the way others wear a tailored coat. But there were nights the lining scratched, and he listened for the echo of a childhood door that had never opened again. From the mezzanine, he watched the line file past the time clock, and then his breath hitched. One figure moved in a way that prided something lodged in him, a tilt of the head, narrow shoulders, a hand lifted to rub a rib the way someone remembers an old bruise. A cold certainty rolled through him like a wave. He gripped the railing until the metal grew cold. Dale barked orders, and one of the men pushed Evan to move faster. Adrian stepped down the stairs quietly and watched Evan lift another heavy sack, stagger, breathe in that particular hissing way people make after a hard knock. "Leave him," Adrian said before he even meant to. The few men who'd felt the thin authority of his voice softened without fully knowing why. Adrian did not expect to speak, only to watch, but the words came. "What's his name?" he asked. Dale shrugged. "Doesn't matter," he said. "They come, they go. It matters," Adrian answered. He moved closer, his suit catching a dusting of flour. He lifted a corner of Evan's sleeve without touching, and there it was. A thin white scar along the forearm, a jagged comma earned falling off a bicycle long ago. Something inside Adrian shortened into a sharp breath. "Come with me," he told Evan, then turned to Dale. "Pay him for the day." Outside, the city smelled of river and late light. Evan walked a cautious half-step behind Adrian. The kind of walk that tries to tell the world it is not being led but escorted. Adrian said, almost in confession, "I know someone who looked like you. My brother." The word hovered between them, fragile as glass. Evan said nothing at first. Names had become tickets he couldn't afford. Adrian gestured at a black sedan, waiting like a sentence without a period. "Just coffee," he offered. "You can tell me to go to hell afterward." They sat in a quiet cafe. The server glanced at Evan's clothes and then at Adrian. quietly reassessing how to price kindness. Adrian ordered 2 coffees and a sandwich, then another sandwich, as if hunger had suddenly been introduced by name. Evan ate with a slow caution that comes from a body unsure whether good things will last. When Adrian asked why Evan slept on the street, Evan rubbed his forearm where the scar caught under his skin. He told a short, broken version his wife's illness, insurance that didn't cover enough, a house that slipped away, anger that burned the bridges that tried to help. After she died, Evan said, he kept moving to avoid seeing the loss. Adrian listened not just to a stranger's pain, but to the echo of his own. Adrian told his brief version, a brother who disappeared at 12 from a foster home that was supposed to be temporary. Money had bought silence, not answers. The hospital of memory had one photograph, a face in a Bible drawer that never moved. For Adrian, the line that scarred Evan's arm and the way he rubbed his ribs were proof enough to make his chest ache with hope and fear. Outside the shelter, after Evan took a quick shower and returned wearing a borrowed shirt Adrian pressed into his hands, the businessman drove them to a small house in a neighborhood where porches and older summers remembered what children had been. A gray-haired woman with sky-colored eyes opened the door and held Adrian's forearms with a tenderness that made Evan look away. Her name was Moran, their old neighbor who'd patched knees and once driven a frantic mother to the hospital. Inside, Moran studied Evan as a nurse studies a patient, not judging the clothing, but tracing the lines on his hands. She found the crescent scar near the base of Evan's left thumb and nodded as if a page had turned to a familiar line. She whispered of a bicycle and a stubborn mailbox. Evan's face almost broke into a smile. Adrian could not find words at first. When he did, they felt dangerous in the quiet room. It has to be, Moran said softly. No one else carries that scar that way. Adrian reached across the table and said Evan's name the way he had not allowed himself to say it in 25 years. Thomas. Evan flinched at the name, then shook his head. No, my name is Evan, I don't know you. The room was suddenly small. Adrian, desperate for proof he could hold, suggested a DNA test. One swab. If I'm wrong, you walk away and never hear from me again. If I'm right, you come home. Evan agreed to think about it and then left. For days Adrian's work blurred, numbers on spreadsheets softened into the contour of a face. He returned to rooftops where day laborers gathered, scanning crowds, hoping to glimpse that same lean figure. Sometimes Evan vanished like smoke. Finally, Adrian slipped an envelope addressed simply to Ivan at the shelter desk, a note asking him to meet at the clinic, and a quiet plea to allow proof the brothers could not yet speak. On a grey, drizzly Wednesday, Ivan showed up at the clinic and submitted to the swab. 3 days stretched like a lifetime. When the results arrived, a 99.97% probability of a full sibling relationship. Adrian's hands shook. He rushed to the shelter with the paper like an offering. Ivan looked at the certificate and folded his arms around the truth as if it were nothing. So what? He said. Sharing blood doesn't change the fact that you have towers and I sleep under bridges. I'm not your brother. I'm a charity case. Adrian's voice broke. You're not nothing. He insisted he wasn't there for pride or to solve guilt. He'd lost his brother once, he said, and he would not lose him again. Evan's jaw tightened, the words landed like stones. For a brief, volatile moment it seemed Evan might lash out, but he turned and walked back into the rain. The weeks that followed were a persistent tug of war. Adrian tried small mercies, new clothes, a modest apartment, a job offer. Evan pushed back. He was not ready to be seen as the missing brother. He had built walls to survive. Moran, with the quiet wisdom of someone who knew how memories and time reshape people, sat with Evan outside a church one night. "You think being found is a burden," she said, "but being lost is heavier." Her words planted a seed. The turning point came at their mother's grave in late autumn. Under drifting leaves and a sky grey with the kind of cold that makes people speak soft and true, Adrian told Evan that their mother had prayed for him every night and had made Adrian promise to keep looking. Evan stood long, then knelt and touched the headstone with hands that had once mended bikes and now bore years of survival. He let himself cry for the first time in decades. Trust did not rebuild in a day. There were awkward dinners and small steps, fits and fractures. But gradually, even accepted real work at one of Adrian's warehouses. Not charity, Adrian insisted, but a chance to earn steady hours and dignity. Evan learned to wash, to cut his beard, to settle into a routine where his hands counted for more than his past. Months later, on a winter night when snow pressed like a soft hush against Adrian's windows, the brothers sat by the fire. Steam curled from their mugs. Adrian asked quietly if Evan still believed they could be brothers. Evan looked into the flames, then back at Adrian. "We already are," he said. Outside, snow whispered against glass. Inside, the two men, once divided by years and silence, warmed themselves with something fragile and knew the slow, steady work of becoming family again.